Tonight is all about Social Security. And I was thinking back in August when I saw several articles come out at the same time about how the Social Security Reserve Fund is depleting faster than we had previously anticipated. I thought, man, this is a great time to talk about Social Security, where we've been and where we're going. So tonight I've got Social Security myths and mysteries we're going to talk about, just to add an element of fun into this because we need fun. And then we're going to talk about filing break-even analysis. It's a mouthful, but basically when we file and we look at break-even, how do we figure out when the right time to file? And finally, we're going to look at Social Security past, present, and future to close our conversation tonight. Okay, so we're going to move through. I got a lot of slides, so we're going to dive right in to the first myth that I often hear is, does the government borrow money from the Social Security Reserve Fund? And I've heard this for years. I've heard people tell me, oh, well, that if the government needs money, they just dip into the Social Security Reserve. And that is not the case. That's actually a myth. So there has never been any change in the way the Social Security program is financed or the way that Social Security payroll taxes are being used by the federal government. So it was created in 1939. And it from its inception, the trust fund has always worked the same way. The Social Security Trust Fund has never been part of the general fund for our government. So we'll put that one aside and know that to whatever extent we've got money in the trust fund, it's only being used to pay Social Security benefits. First sigh of relief. The second myth or question, which political party eliminated the income tax deduction for Social Security withholding? Okay, so let me rephrase that. So it was thought at one point, or maybe it was, that you could deduct what you put into the Social Security system. True or false? So that is another myth. So it turns out that there was never any provision of law making the Social Security taxes paid by employees deductible for income tax purposes. In fact, there was a law that expressly forbid this in 1935. So nothing has changed there. We were never able to deduct the amount of money that we put into the Social Security system. And I think that may have been confused with this next myth, which is, which political party started taxing Social Security annuities? And I don't want to go political in this discussion, but there's going to be several of these myths or mysteries that ask about which party was responsible. So we'll make light of that. And I will just tell you that both parties were responsible for it. So as it turns out, the taxation of Social Security began in 1984, which was following the passage of an amendment in 1983, which was signed into law by President Reagan. So these amendments passed the Congress in 1983, and they were overwhelmingly bipartisan vote approved. So, and at that point, 50% of the benefits were subject to taxes. So that was the Republicans coming in and saying, yeah, we're going to tax Social Security. Then in 1993, legislation was enacted, which had the effect of increasing the tax from 50% to 85%. And that was, of course, when President Clinton was in office. That one was a little bit closer in the Senate and required a tiebreaker vote from, at that point, Vice President Al Gore. So both parties were responsible for taxing our Social Security benefits. Those parties, what kind of party is this? Okay, next myth. Which political party decided to start giving annuity payments to immigrants? And this was very conversational a few years ago. We were all worried about this. As it turns out, neither immigrants nor anyone else is able to collect Social Security benefits without someone paying Social Security payroll taxes into the system. So this question confuses the Supplemental Security Income, or the SSI program, with Social Security. And SSI is a federal welfare program and with no contributions required. So immigrants under certain circumstances can be eligible for those types of benefits, but it's a totally separate system than the Social Security system. And so it would not contribute to depleting our Social Security Reserve Fund. Okay, this is moving along pretty fast, so I'll go into a little bit more detail on this one just because I find it interesting. How often does the Social Security system give us a raise? Or does it ever? So I think everybody's aware that it does once in a while, but to what extent? I'll read through some of this because I know the font is pretty small, but the Social Security system started giving raises or increases clear back in 1975. The first one was 8% right out of the gate, followed by the next year 6.4%, the next year 5.9%, and that's gone on and on and on. Most recently 5.9% in 2021. Now, there has only been 3 years in the history of Social Security that a raise has not been given. And it happened to have been in 2009 and 2010. And then also again in 2015. And those were very, very low inflationary years. You can see on the left-hand side of this chart, I've got inflation statistics. Back in 1980, for example, when we had inflation of 12.5%, there was a raise on Social Security of 14.3%. In 1990, inflation was 6.1%, and Social Security gave a raise of 5.4%. So for the most part, Social Security has done a pretty good job keeping up with inflation, which is good news. Now, this is the last of the mysteries, and kind of this is more of a story and not necessarily factual, but it is one that potentially could have happened. That sounds pretty watered down, but let me explain. And a few of you that logged in early enough probably heard the Tonight Show theme, Doc Severinsen. Here's Johnny. So this may not have happened exactly this way, but it could have happened. And it's kind of a famous story about Social Security. And so I'll kind of read some material that's on this card for you. Basically, we all know who Johnny Carson was. Many of us know that he was married several times. In fact, he had 4 different spouses. His first wife, he was married to for 15 years. His second wife, 9 years. His third wife, 13 years. And his fourth wife, he was married to until he passed away in 2005. And that lasted 18 years. So what is interesting about the Social Security system is that if you are married for at least 10 years, you're eligible for spousal benefits. Now, a lot of our clients would say to us, what are the tips and tricks for maximizing Social Security benefits? And while we would never suggest this, this is certainly a strategy that allowed Johnny Carson potentially his ex-wives to maximize the benefit. So I'll point this out and then we'll move on. So in the first line where it says at full retirement, assuming Johnny got $2,500 a month. And again, we have no idea how much he got because Social Security is private, not public information. So only Johnny or his advisors and Social Security would know. But assuming he got $2,500 a month, his first wife, who was married for more than 10 years, that's 15 years, would be able to collect half of his amount. So Johnny got 25, his first wife got $1,250, his third wife got $1,250, and his fourth wife got $1,250. So the total amount pulled out of Social Security while Johnny was alive was $6,250. Now, just to clarify again, his second wife was only married for 9.65 years, a third of a year short of tenure. And had she gotten that tenure, she would also be eligible. So when Johnny passed away, he no longer was collecting Social Security, but all of his surviving spouses not only got to collect his spousal amount, but they got bumped up to his amount. So all three of his wives that were eligible now collected his full retirement amount of, let's say, $2,500, thus pulling $7,500 out of the system. And can you imagine if he was married to his second wife for a third of a year more? There'd be $10,000 coming out of the system just on Johnny's behalf. Here's Johnny. Kind of a fun story, not relevant necessarily, but an interesting mystery of Social Security. Okay, so we're going to move on to kind of the second segment of the night, and this is our view on when to file. And there are a lot of tips and strategies and different considerations on when somebody would file. But one of the main topics or main ideas is, when do you break even? So deciding to collect is a simple matter of break even, right? But which break even is the question. So we've done a little bit of work behind the scenes, and I'm going to kind of walk you through this traditional model first. So you can see this is a graph, and the purple line represents if you start collecting Social Security at age 62, that's the amount of money you accumulate. And I'm going to call that the 62 line. The green line represents how much money you're going to collect if you start collecting at age 66. And you can see that that obviously starts 4 years later, but increases at a more rapid rate because you're getting a little bit more money. And then the third line, the blue line, we're going to call it the 70 line, is much later when you start collecting, but it increases even more rapid. And kind of the common thought here is that when those lines cross, that's the break even. So for example, you can see that at 75, hopefully you can see that, it's pretty small font, but you can see a green vertical line that's dashed. That represents the first break even. So what that is saying is that if you chose to collect at age 66, that 66 line now intersects the 62 line. So at that point, as long as you live past age 75, you would have been better off waiting until age 66. Now, the other line, the 70 line, intersects the 66 line clear out at age 80. So at that point, you could say, well, as long as I live to be 80 years old, I would have been better off waiting until age 70 to collect Social Security. So makes sense, right? So this model assumes that we take the money from Social Security, we spend it right away, or we save it, but we do nothing with it other than stack it up, maybe stick it in the mattress. The problem with this model is it doesn't recognize that $1 today is worth more than $1 10 years down the road, right? Because if we're given money, we have the opportunity to do something with it now. So there's a cost to that. We call that opportunity cost. So if we apply opportunity cost, it means that we need to somehow increase the value of getting money earlier on as opposed to later. So we're going to take a look at what that looks like here. So kind of the same scenario, right? We got somebody collecting at 62, which is the purple line, 66, which is the green line, and then 70, which is the blue line. And then we're doing the same analysis. We're trying to figure out how soon do we break even? So the first line, the green vertical, is at age 84. So that means that at that point, if you live to be longer than 84, you live to be older than 84, you would have been better off collecting at age 66 than 62. Now that's a long time, right? And it's also a lot different than the first graph. The first graph, it said 75. But if we start to consider the opportunity cost of money, by the way, I'm using 6% as my figure for an investment return or opportunity cost. It pushes that break even out substantially. And then the difference between age 70 or the 70 line and age 66 or the 66 line is pushed out clear till 89 years of age. So what that is saying is that if you value your money today more than you do down the road, and you assign some sort of value to that money, in my case, I'm saying 6%, this model suggests that you would have to live to be older than 89 in order to justify deferring out your Social Security until age 70. And I'll say that one more time because I think it's a mouthful, but this model suggests that in order to justify not taking your Social Security until age 70, if you value money now more than you would 10 years down the road and your opportunity cost is 6%, you have to live longer than 89. That was a lot. The decision to file and when you file is much more complicated than a break even. There are certainly considerations for different age spouses, different benefits. I think there's a lot more to it, but this I think is a good basis to start considering, do you really get punished that much by collecting early? And under the traditional model, you might. However, when we start to apply opportunity cost, or rather put some value on getting money now, as opposed to down the road, it really does push those break evens out significantly. One more thing on this topic, and this one always kind of cracks me up because I find that it's very ironic. If you're turning 65 today and you're a man, your life expectancy is 84.3. And actually, it's a little lower. They revised that. It's 83.2. And if you're a woman turning 65, your life expectancy is, this says 86.6, but it's actually 85.8 right now. So if we go back and look at our break evens, our break even is 84 and 89. Our life expectancy is 84 and 87. One more look at that. Our break even is 84 and 89, and our life expectancy is 84 and 87. What is really interesting to me about this, every time I look at it, I think to myself, maybe those actuaries that work for the Social Security system actually knew what they're doing, and they were indifferent to when you file because they thought the average person is still going to get the same amount of money because they're all going to pass away at 85 or 87. At least we are as a group of people. So I think that's interesting. I would certainly consider the election of when to file, your personal health issues and your own longevity. That certainly comes into play. Okay. So we're going to move on to kind of the last segment of this presentation, which I think is more topical and more timely. So we're going to run through past, present, and future of Social Security. And by the way, this is something we do every week in our staff meetings. We talk about what happened, although it's just for a week. We talk about what happened last week, what happens this week, and what's going to happen next week. And that's a really, I think, healthy way for us to consider looking ahead and how it's influenced by what happened. So let's dive in and talk about the Social Security past. First thing we'll note is that the inception of Social Security, as many of you probably know, was in 1935. The first benefit paid was in 1940. Now, I think this is pretty interesting too. In 1940, the ratio of workers to retirees was a 40-to-1 ratio. So for every one retiree, there were 40 people. There were 40 people working. That's interesting. So in 1983, and then we're gonna start to talk about when Social Security is going to lose their reserve fund. And this, I'm starting to allude to that right now. How soon is it going to be a problem for us? And it's coming. But in 1983, the trustees actually said, hey, you know what? We're good. We're in actuarial balance. We are good for 75 years. So in 83, they said, well, we're good all the way up until 2057. We're not going to have any problems. That was the same year that they changed the full retirement age from age 65 to age 67. So prior to then, your FRA, full retirement age, was 65, and then it was phased in till 67. If you're going to file now to get FRA benefits, you've got to be 67. Okay, so this graph is the graph of the fertility rate in the United States from the 1800s until 2020. And a lot of you are probably thinking, why is this important? Why is it relevant? And that's a fair question. I don't know that it is. It goes back way too far. But when I saw the chart, I thought it was really interesting how clear back a couple hundred years ago, the average birth rate was 7 kids per female, which is just a lot. And it's obviously changed. It's gone down drastically. You can see it kind of bottoms out in the 30s, right around 2%. And then we had our boomer generation, that little spike in the middle. Those are our boomers. Boys coming home from the war, we peak up and then it drops off again and kind of hovers around 2%. So why is this relevant? Well, I mean, Social Security, if you think about it as a business, it has, its inflows and its outflows. The inflows are its tax revenue, and that tax revenue is derived by the workers. And so the more workers we have in the system, the more tax revenue we have, business is good. The expenses, on the other hand, are all the people that are retired that we're paying old age survivor benefits to, right? So up until a certain point, our income was adequate and we were actually able to start socking money away. And then at some point it's shifted and now we're spending more money than we're bringing in. And that seems to be the crux of the problem. So this graph to me kind of illustrates that. And you can see that everything in kind of the gray area on the left-hand side, for the most part, it's a surplus of money coming in. And that happened, until 2007. And then we had this big fund of money and it's earning money, right? This money's invested, so it's earning a little bit. So it's not necessarily getting depleted yet, but our income side of the equation isn't working out as much as we liked it. And we're starting to spend more money. Now, this graph is old and it's dated and it's clear back into 2010, I think is when they produced this or published it. But I still find it interesting, one, that even back in 2010, 2007, obviously we knew there was an issue coming and we really haven't done anything about it since. In the last 15 years, I mean, it's the problem with Social Security has been around for a long time, but we don't seem to be making any headway on dealing with it. So I like that. I like this graph for that very reason. So where do we stand today? So that's the past. That is the past. So let's talk about what kind of condition we're in right now. So we have currently $2.9 trillion in our Social Security Reserve Fund. And that Social Security Reserve Fund, as we talked about, can't be borrowed from. It's just sitting there. It's invested. It's invested in a special kind of treasury, one that only the Social Security system can invest in, which is great for them. And it earns about 2.3% on average. These special treasuries, by the way, are redeemable like cash anytime at face value. So it's a very, very good bond, and only the Social Security Administration has access to it. Okay, so currently we have 50 million beneficiaries getting benefits from the system, and we have 150 million workers funding into the system. There's some rounding there, I'm sure. So, but the ratio is currently a 3-to-1 ratio. And you remember when we started off, it was a 40-to-1 ratio. So we're down to a 3-to-1 ratio. So our income relatively to our expenses has drastically decreased. Now that 3-to-1 ratio has been existing since sometime in the 80s. So that's not necessarily a new surprise, but it puts us in a much more dangerous situation when we simply don't have the labor to contribute to the system. So this is a really important consideration. Presently, the way the law works for us now is there is an inability to borrow funds to pay obligations in the Social Security Administration. So benefits are only payable out of the reserves and current payroll tax inflows under current law. So that means that unlike a lot of our government spending where we can issue new bonds we can borrow money, Under current law, we cannot do that with the Social Security Administration. And that's really part of the problem, kind of the corner that we've backed ourselves into. So to the question, and this is always the big question, when are we going to run out of money? So I was reading the Board of Trustees for the Social Security Administration's report they published last year. And by the way, if you remember back in, was it 85, they had predicted that we were good until 1957. We had 75 years or something. And then they were obviously off a little bit. Last year, they changed it again. And instead of something like 2034, they're now saying 2033, maybe 2032. So they're kind of moving the goalpost even a little bit closer to us. So right now we've got a great surplus, but it's going down pretty quickly. And chances are, unless they do something drastically different, that surplus is going to be entirely gone in maybe another decade. So we're looking at 2032, 2033. So our surplus is going away. And as we just mentioned, there is an inability to borrow money to pay benefits under current law. So if that is the case and we don't do anything, what's going to happen? So here we go. Not to get too doom and gloomy, because I think there's there's some silver lining in here that we can talk about. But what does the future of Social Security look like? Okay, so again, by 2032, 2035, without any changes, the reserve is estimated to be exhausted. It's another 10 years, and they keep moving the goalpost a little closer. So continuing taxes, so that the amount of payroll taxes that we have coming in, or at least that we're estimating, will only be good enough to pay 73 to 78% of scheduled benefits. So what does that mean? That means that the actuaries and the people that run the models are looking out going, well, based off of the revenue that we're going to bring in 10 years, we're only going to be able to pay out about 3/4 of the benefits that we owe. Also, in another 10 years down the road, they're expecting our ratio of workers to retirees to be 2-to-1, not even the 3-to-1 that it is right now. So what we're looking at is, unless we make some serious changes, we're looking at a certainty of reduced benefits potentially 10 years down the road. Now, I'm kind of optimistic. I feel like even in the last quarter, it is football season, there's going to be some great save, and we're going to come in and we're going to make some changes. And we do have some options that we can do to address the deficiencies. I found it really encouraging. Janet Yellen, the chair of the Treasury Board, if I'm not mistaken, was drafting the report, and she strongly encouraged our current leaders to address this now rather than address it later. Even pointed out 3 great solutions, and probably what we would expect to see happen in the next 10 years is something like this. There are a few options. One option would be to increase payroll taxes. It's currently 12.4%. If we increased it to 14.4%, that would potentially solve the problem. Or we could immediately lower benefits by 13%. These are both tough pills to swallow. But if we lowered benefits right now by 13%, it would save us enough money over the next decade that we wouldn't have to lower it by 25%. Finally, instead of having people collect their full retirement age benefits at age 67, we could push that down the road as well. In other words, maybe you're not eligible for full retirement age benefits until age 70. So that's a possibility as well. Or finally, some combination of all of the above. So a scenario might be that we increase payroll taxes to 13%, and push out full retirement age benefits to age 68 or 69, and even potentially lower out or stop doing the cost of living adjustments to the extent that we are. Okay, so last slide. This is we've made it through the last slide, and we're doing it in good time here. We're just at 35 minutes, so I'm a little over. Thank you guys for hanging in there. This is where I think the silver lining is. Most of the people that I know that we work with are not relying on Social Security exclusively, certainly not. But then I think most of you are in a position where it's great to have coming in, but a reduction in Social Security isn't going to be that big of an issue. That being said, we all budget and we all plan for the resources that we have. We want to be good stewards. So as you start to think about what's going to happen 10 years down the road, we think that there's going to be some change. Social Security is going to be there. It's not going to go broke. I mean, they're going to be out of money, but they're still going to have revenue coming in from payroll taxes. So they're still going to pay benefits. But chances are it's not going to be as much. That's what we think, unless they change the law and allow us to borrow more money. But that doesn't seem to be the climate for that. It's not very favorable. So what do we do? If you buy into this premise, I think what we do is we start to plan ahead, right? And we start to think about how do we replace that income if necessary with some alternatives. And everybody knows where this is coming, but we're going to say, how do you do that? You got to know your options, right? You need to have a holistic look at the big picture with the details. We say this is a great time to focus in on your playbook. Make sure that you know all of the options that are available to you. And you probably have more options than you thought. So that's the presentation. Again, I want to end this on a bright note by thinking we're 10 years away from this. We still have plenty of time to plan. But I think this is the time to do it. So especially if this is a consideration that is going to be impactful for you, let's start to have a conversation about it. So finally, I'll just say again, thank you guys so much for being here tonight. I appreciate you guys taking the time. We will do an edit on this video and send it out if you want to watch it again. Thank you guys. Have a great night. It's been fun.